Welcome back to the Loreweaver podcast. Today's episode is my 2025 reading highlights and letdowns. This isn't a list of best and worst in a reductive sense. Instead, I want to talk about what succeeded, what fell short, and why, because often the most interesting conversations come from contrast. I'll be rotating between my best reads and my most disappointing reads. Let's start on a high note. Best read, Daughter of Chaos. The Dark Pantheon #1 by A.S. Webb. Since childhood, Greek mythology has been one of my longest running obsessions. I'm always searching for retellings and reimaginings that feel fresh without losing the soul of the myths, and Daughter of Chaos is the best example of that balance that I have ever read. The novel follows Danae, a fisherman's daughter destined for something far larger than her quiet beginnings. Her story unfolds as a full Greek epic, complete with gods, prophecy, mysteries, and legendary figures woven seamlessly into the narrative. What makes this book exceptional is how confidently it embraces the chosen one structure while interrogating it. The story itself acknowledges that these kinds of destinies usually belong to royalty, not commoners, and that awareness keeps the narrative from ever feeling stale or formulaic. Danae is a phenomenal protagonist, courageous, flawed, and deeply human. But what truly amazes me was the care poured into every character, even minor ones. Everyone feels like they have their own lives, desires, and trajectories, which makes the world feel vibrant and alive. The prose is lush and lyrical without being overindulgent, capturing the grandeur of myth while remaining intimate and character driven. From humble fishing villages to grand temples to mysterious islands, every setting felt fully realized. This was definitely a 5-star read for me, and I'm counting the days until the sequel comes out. Disappointing read. Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross. This one was frustrating because it started out so strong. I initially listened to an audio arc sneak peek of Wild Reverence through NetGalley. It was the first 4 hours and 45 minutes, and at that point I was convinced this would be my favorite Rebecca Ross novel. The premise felt perfectly tailored to my taste. The story follows Matilda, a young goddess born of 2 rival divine clans, raised in a brutal world of shifting alliances and lethal power struggles. Gods can kill one another to absorb their power, and mortals are used as pawns. Against that backdrop, Matilda becomes drawn to a mortal named Vincent, visiting him in his dreams even as divine politics tighten around her. The world building is excellent, the lore is rich, the divine hierarchy compelling, and the prose is lyrical and immersive. The audio production only enhanced the atmosphere. Unfortunately, once I got the full copy of the book, my opinion shifted dramatically. While the world building and character work remain strong, the middle and ending simply don't land. The central romance never earns the level of obsessive fixation the narrative demands, and the falling action drags on well past the story's natural conclusion. Worse, it attempts to romanticize poverty as somehow preferable to security and stability, which felt deeply uncomfortable and unearned. Ultimately, this reinforced something I've realized about my reading tastes. Rebecca Ross's approach to romance just doesn't work for me. I ended up lowering my rating from 5 stars to 2. I still think this is her strongest book by far, but that's mostly because I didn't care for the other 2 that I've checked out. Alright, let's get back to another good one. Best read? 6 Wild Crowns. Queens of Elben #1 by Holly Race. 6 Wild Crowns is a beautifully written, ambitious fantasy that reimagines the Tudor court as a realm of dragons and sorcery, and it absolutely delivers. Set in an alternate universe, the novel unfolds through the dual perspectives of Boleyn and Seymour, who are inspired by Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour. Queen Aragon, inspired by Catherine of Aragon, sends Seymour to spy on the rising Boleyn, and a dangerous game of political intrigue begins. What elevates this book is its cast of women. Aragon, Parr, Cleves, Blount, Howard, Boleyn, and Seymour are all rendered with distinct ambitions, strengths, and vulnerabilities. Race explores how competition and solidarity can coexist, and also examines how women are naturally pitted against each other, often for the benefit of a man. This is a nuanced and emotionally honest take on women navigating power, and the world building seamlessly blends historical reality and fantasy elements. Dragons become symbols of volatile power, magic reflects shifting loyalties, and historical figures are portrayed with more psychological depth than any traditional retellings allow. This is a lot like The Song of Ice and Fire meets The Tudors with a fresh perspective and genuine care. This was an easy 5-star read for me. And it's also another one where I cannot wait for the sequel. All right, back to the disappointing pile. Upon a Starlit Tide by Kell Woods. I really wanted to love this book. The world building is stunning. It's rich, immersive. From the opening chapters, the setting pulls you in and promises something special. Unfortunately, the character work undermines this promise. The protagonist lacks a strong sense of identity, and her decisions often feel dictated by plot mechanics rather than believable emotional motivation. Many fascinating ideas are introduced, but never fully explored because the story remains tethered to a character who doesn't feel real. The romance lacks chemistry and depth, making it difficult to invest in the stakes of the story. This was a case of incredible potential paired with disappointing execution. With stronger character writing, this could have been an unforgettable read. As it stands, it felt hollow. Another best read for me this year was Sisters of the Wind by Angeline Boulley. Sisters of the Wind is a powerful, emotionally resonant novel that continues the author's interconnected series that started with Firekeeper's Daughter and continued with Warrior Girl Unearthed. The story follows Lucy Smith, a teen runaway who has survived the foster care system and is now being hunted for reasons she doesn't understand. After an attempt on her life, she's discovered by Donis Fontaine, the protagonist of Firekeeper's Daughter. Donis reveals the truth of Lucy's Native American heritage. The narrative unfolds in dual timelines, Lucy's present-day struggle for survival and flashbacks to her childhood and moving through foster placements in moments of safety and loss. Together they expose the long history of systemic harm inflicted on Native communities through forced separation, foster care, and cultural erasure. Lucy is one of the most compelling protagonists I've read this year. She's sharp, guarded, self-reliant, and deeply human. The character work is exceptional, and the plotting is tight, suspenseful, and emotionally grounded. This was a moving, unforgettable read. Boulley continues to prove she is a master of character-driven storytelling. The last disappointing read I'll get into for this episode was One for All by Lily Lainoff. This one falls squarely in the fine but forgettable category. I don't regret reading it. I know that it's a book that's often challenged by book banners, and I definitely wanted to support it. And I also love the concept. A musketeer-inspired story with a female cast should have been an instant hit for me. But in execution, the story never fully came together for me. It's not a bad book, it just didn't stand out, especially given how strong the premise was. And the last book of 2025 that I will discuss here, Masquerade by Oo Sangoyomi. Masquerade is a beautifully written, immersive novel set in a pre-colonial West Africa, following Ododo, a blacksmith desperate to escape the brutal treatment unmarried women endure. When she is kidnapped to become the wife of the most powerful man in the land, her life is transformed, pulling her into a web of court politics, uprisings, and war. Dodo's character is the novel's greatest strength. Her growth feels earned, complex, and deeply compelling. The setting is richly realized, and the plot was consistently engaging. While there are moments where the conflict arises from avoidable misunderstandings, this is a minor flaw in an otherwise excellent book. This was definitely a powerful and memorable read. Looking back, what stands out to me isn't just which books I loved or didn't, it's why. The books I resonated the most with this year centered on characters, emotional logic, and allowed the themes to unfold naturally. The books that disappointed me often stumbled not because of weak ideas, but because the execution didn't support the story being told. If you've read any of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially if your experience with them was different than mine. And if one of these sounds like your kind of book, I really hope you give it a try. Thanks for listening to the Loreweaver podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, consider following the show so you don't miss any future reviews, analysis, or deep dives. Until next time, keep exploring the lore.